So Philip, this week did you hear about the nuclear physicist who was frustrated with scams?
No. What about him?
He suffered from confusion.
Well, we've fully dried the well of Marxist ones, and now we're just into straight jokes.
So a little backstory for this: we're recording this on the day that the government facility announced that they successfully produced more energy out of a nuclear fission experiment than it costs to create. Like so, they made a fusion reaction, and they got more energy out of it than it cost to make it happen, which is a huge breakthrough. But more further background, back in the 1980s, there was a group that claimed to have done this very thing, but later, after further analysis of their research, it was found that it was bullshit. They hadn't. So it's kind of like a running joke in the science community of nuclear fusion is always 10 years away or 30 years away. And part of that is because of bad science journalism, and science journalists reported as we're just 10 years away from fusion reactors. And well, we're not. You don't measure it like that. You don't know. We're one step closer, but we don't know what the end get, like where the end point is, where it actually is functional. So
Yeah,
I digress.
my understanding of why this is a big deal is essentially that um, the getting more power out of it than you put into it is obviously like kind of the baseline need for any sort of like power source. But in particular, this is a big deal because like being able to do that at all makes it potentially worthwhile to investigate like actually designing like some sort of power plant that utilizes this process, right? Like prior to like assuming that like it pans out and everything, like prior to that, it would be um it will now officially be worthwhile to potentially, start looking at how would you design a power plant that utilizes this because they all sort of fundamentally operate off of steam turbines or whatever. Uh,
Yeah, no,
just
100%. And it's extremely costly and expensive. And so yeah, we need to have like proof of concept to get anybody to want to invest into uh research and development. Yeah, because I mean, like this one, they fired like hundreds of lasers at an atom in order to make this happen, and it's like the most powerful lasers on earth, and it's this whole immense thing to make this happen. So yeah, it's expensive, and so you want to make sure you're getting something out of it before anybody is in any way interested in. That's not what this
yeah.
podcast is about.
No, yeah. Suffice to say, there's a whole lot of development still yet to go before we start having fusion power plants. But it's cool.
It's exciting, and we're nerds. So what this podcast is about, this is Raise 'em Left. We're a parenting podcast. We talk about parenting topics from a leftist view and perspective. Um, I'm Tom McFarland, and this is Philip Sipe. We are both parents. I'm a stay-at-home parent, and Philip is uh, just a regular,
Working parent, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
working parent. There we go. It's like, wait, how do I frame that? Um, Philip
A
is a
poor
long.
excuse for a parent.
No, 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 no. Philip is a long-time parent, a multiple parent, and I am a new parent, fresh off the press. And today I want to talk about a topic that is very prescient, very immediate, and that I'm dealing with right now a whole lot often. And that is catastrophization and anxiety with having a child. Um, and so right off the get-go, I want to talk about just very briefly. I don't want to get too much into the science and too data-y and monologue-y, but there's really quite a bit of medical evidence that becoming a parent changes your physiological makeup, your hormones, your psychological uh, both output and just your state of being. Um, for some folks, specifically folks who have anxiety, trauma, or other neurodivergencies, this can be made more pronounced. Like those neurodivergencies can become more pronounced, and also other things can develop. Anxiety and some things that can develop can be dysfunctional. We're going to be talking to some degree about some of that. I do want to give a bit of a content warning. I'm going to talk about some suicidal ideations and things like that in this episode. Um, and yeah, and like psychological dysfunctions. And when I say dysfunction, I do mean that a little bit differently than like some literature. Some literature kind of really looks at dysfunction as anything that ceases you from being productive. And I think that's a bullshit capitalist centric way of looking at things. I would say a dysfunction is anything that prevents you from being happy and healthy. Like, as simple as that. You're happy and healthy in life. If you are not being able to be that because of something going on, that's dysfunctional. Um, so then what exactly I'm talking about with anxiety and catastrophization? It's something I've experienced a lot as I've became a parent. It's often described, catastrophization, this is described as an assumption that the worst will happen. I don't really find that to be the best description. It's a little more nuanced than that. I mean, it is that the worst can happen. That's kind of a neurotypical way of reading it, I think. But for me, it's an internalization of a conflict or a situation. So something happens, I internalize it. This is a thing, like, but yeah, it's internalized to my, what's going on with me. It expands into an irrational perception of outcome that can often be seen even internally as irrational. Like, I can understand it to be irrational, but it's going on anyway. And that can be something like the baby's crying, and I internalize that into like, I need to get sleep. I am not getting any sleep. This is a problem for me now. Um, and then it catastrophizes. I am never again going to sleep. I am never going to have sleep again. And then I can even register this as irrational. Well, obviously, I'm going to get sleep. It's just right now this is a problem, but it doesn't matter. I cycle into that anyways, and that just can keep spooling in my head until anxiety builds and builds, and until that can become something much worse. And that's when it can culminate into intrusive, sometimes suicidal thoughts. Like, I'm never going to get sleep unless I do blank. Um,
Yeah, I often think of this as like spiraling is
mhm.
how it kind of feels to me. Like you just like keep spinning and spinning and spinning and like sort of falling continuously down a rabbit hole of um layered assumptions about how things will go that does kind of a little bit have this feature of like assuming the worst, or like assuming at least like a particularly bad outcome, uh even if it's not like literally the worst you could imagine. It's still like a bad thing you could imagine, and then building on that and building on that until you sort of like reach this like like life is ruined, like over really like darker type thoughts sometimes. And I've definitely been in that position periodically. It was especially a lot worse before I was medicated for ADHD, as emotional regulation is a part of that, as we talked about in a previous episode. So like definitely getting a little bit better regulated emotionally just in general helps me interrupt that process. Like I know like when I've had it, like getting into a catastrophizing mindset, like you get in this it almost feels like I don't know if dissociation is the right word, but it's like it's almost like witnessing yourself do the thing. Like you feel it and you know it's you, but you also feel like you're watching yourself do it and you can't stop. Like this sort of like
An intrusive thought.
yeah, you have this like, but it's almost I understand that's probably the correct term, but like the experience of it feels different to me than those words would suggest, which is that like it's like I or who I feel like I really am, like takes a back seat to this like version of me that's like spiraling out of control emotionally, and just like watching and trying to like keep interjecting like, no, hey, look, hold on, but then like just can't like wrest control from the emotional spiral. And it's like a little bit disturbing because you can't um that lack of control also means you can't like fully express that's what's going on. You just keep trying to like rationalize the emotion when you're like speaking out loud to other people or whatever. And so it's a rough, and I've been there.
Yeah, and for me too, I think one of the things that makes it really hard is, yeah, whenever you discuss this with somebody else in the moment, especially, a lot of folks' responses to try to rationalize to you, like, no, it's not because of this and this and this, and it's like, no, I know that. That doesn't stop me from thinking this. Doesn't stop me from going down this route. I know that you're not helping, which is, and it's in good faith. People are trying to help,
Yeah.
but it also doesn't. For me, it does not help because it's like I know it's irrational, but this is where my brain is at. Um, and for me, before we even get to the what do you do about this, one of the biggest things I could say you could do about this is to seek therapy and to seek, to seek healthcare. Um, and this is something that I am at a stage at. We talked in some previous podcasts in molding masculinity. I was at that time I was going to therapy, and now I'm in a as a stay at home parent. I'm in a break in health insurance, and not going to therapy right now, but I'm going to be once I'm back on health insurance. And oh boy, do I need to do that. And I've really came to terms and came to identify some uh, some mental health issues that I have that I previously was, even in therapy, was in denial that I was having issues with. Chiefly anxiety. My therapist at the time was telling me, look, everything you write down that everything you've written to me of, what you're experiencing, and uh, my survey answers and stuff tells me that you are experiencing astounding anxiety. And I was like, no, I'm not. I feel fine. I'm not having any anxiety at all. And it really took having a child, first of all, and then having a child has had and has some medical issues and has had to spend some time in the hospital, and we've had some extremely scary moments for me to really recognize, like, oh well, even aside from everything else, this has given me anxiety. Now there's an element of PTSD folded into this, but also, yeah, no, there is underlying, like, some of these things that I have recognized as just a normal way of being are anxiety, and oh boy, they're a problem now.
Yeah, it's
um
a really, really hard, just in any mental health thing at all. It like the realization that I've come to, having been through this process with a couple of mental things, is like that there's no reference point when it comes to mental health for basically anyone, because everyone's perception of reality and everyone's mental experience is filtered through their brain. So like there's no such thing as having an experience without a brain, but if your brain has a thing that's wrong with it, right, it's all your perceptions of reality are filtered through that. And so like um you know there's some really good metaphors for this, but like essentially it's like if you are going like, yeah, I just have, I worry a lot about my kid, it's just like really like kind of eats me up a little bit, and everyone's like, yeah, parents, they worry about their kids, and that's true. And you're like, yeah, I guess that is kind of the universal experience, right? Everyone worries about their kid, but like how much, like, and is it like to a point that it's dysfunctional? Like that's hard to tell just based on the description of the thing, because like no one can be like, well, my anxiety's at a 4.73 and mine's at a 6.31. Like there's no objective measurement. You just report like, I feel anxious, or I feel bad, or I feel stressed, or whatever. And there's no way to really, in no easy way, I should say, to like really figure out just kind of intuitively and through casual conversation, because people say things like, yeah, I get stressed out about it too, and yeah, I struggle with that, but it gets better and stuff like that. And sometimes that's true, but like you have no ability to look at a regular functioning experience and be like, oh, if I was exactly who I am but without this anxiety thing, this is what it would feel like. And without that frame of reference, it gets very difficult to tell that you have a problem, because the only way to describe the problem so that it's clear that it is a problem is to make it extreme enough that someone can recognize, well, yeah, that'd be out of control. But then you go like, well, mine's not out of control, so it's not a problem. But that's not true. Like, it's not about being wildly out of control. That's the obvious example. That's like saying like, my leg's not broken because I can't see the bone sticking out. Like, that doesn't mean it's not broken. It just means it's not that broken.
Right. And I think one of the things for me that makes this, especially for me, it makes this hard is a lot of this type of anxiety is I've lived with it for long enough that it is became such a part of the background noise that I only recognize the physiological signs, and so that takes some time to process. Like, I mean, one of the things has been like, since my son was born, I've had repeated issues with like jaw pain, like TMJ stuff.
Mm,
Um, and it's because I'm clenching and grinding my teeth
yeah.
constantly. Is anxiety like
Yeah, that's
uh
exactly what I was about to ask. If you hadn't said it, it was like, are you grinding your teeth?
yeah, and and there's been other, other things that, things that came up even before he was born that, I'd talk to my therapist about, and it would come up, and I was like, well, that's just a normal thing that people do. She'd be like, no, no, that's not. That's not. And I'm like, well, I've always done it. I'm like, yeah, but that's because you have repeatedly been living through this set like framework of circumstances that are outside of the norm and generate anxiety in people, traumatic anxiety a lot of the times. Um, and so, yeah, like working through the underlying noise of all of that can be immensely hard, just identifying that it's what's happening and is what is going on. Um,
Yeah. The only time it's ever been clear for me in any of these circumstances, like, where like I had a mental problem and I like it became like very obvious to me, was either at moments where it truly got out of control. But more commonly, actually, it would be like, well, like I would kind of get convinced by someone to take a leap and try this thing, and then I would like get on some kind of medication, and then I would take it for a while. I'm like, oh, it doesn't really feel any different. I don't know, is this really like a thing, or am I just like spending this money on this medicine for nothing? I can't tell that there's any difference. And people be like, no, you seem a little bit better. And I'd be like, okay, whatever. I don't see what you see. And then I would get off of it. And then I would get the experience of what it was like before the medication, now having a frame of reference of what it was like with. And that slow progress that had been building up and had been invisible to me now suddenly jumped back to where it was. And then it was very obvious. And I was like, oh, no, 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 this is a problem. I need this back.
yes, and I think it's exactly these types of anxieties that, from what I've seen, uh, from the literature that I've seen, tends to lend itself most to episodes of catastrophization. It's highly pronounced for folks who experience repeated trauma, repeated anxiety, or chronic anxiety, where things happen over and over and over and over. So it's not just like this acute anxiety of, oh my, the stress of having a new baby. It's not just that. Now it can be, but I mean, like what like a large percentage of catastrophe, like folks having issues with catastrophization kind of land in this place. One of the things it kind of feed into that from some of the literature I've read is living through repeated trauma scenarios where worst case scenarios do come true. So these can be domestic trauma, military service related trauma, um, really any kind of a, any life trauma where, yeah, no, worst case scenarios actually are something real that you learn to come to expect. And so therefore you just plug them in to every instance. And again, like I think sometimes we don't recognize those as, we don't think in our head, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? That's what's going to happen. Okay, I'm plugging that in. It's just like a background feed of, you're so used to waiting for the other shoe to drop that you're anticipating the shoe to drop. And I, yeah, this is a part of this that I think sometimes, I face with, some things of going through a thing and just really expecting like this kind of far end experience of that to take place, and when it isn't that thing, it also, I think in this end of it, sometimes it leaves you similar to what we were talking about in the last episode. You feel very unprepared with how to deal with things because the worst case scenario doesn't take place, and you're like, oh, I didn't prepare for any of this shit in the middle. Like, I prepared for the most horrific thing that could happen and nothing to happen. Didn't prepare for anything in the in between. Um, and now this can also, stepping back to other things that can be lead to a more pronounced instance of catastrophization. So those are internal, really, a lot of internal structures that kind of lead into this. It can also be external structures. So uh, expectations from your own parents, expectations from other parents, overzealous parenting advice. The world of parenting advice is so full of don't do anything. Like, absolutely anything you do, you will find some literature out there about why that is the worst thing you could possibly do and you're going to ruin your child's life. um, and that can really kind of feed into this. That, and then from that you get back into internalized things, into shame, and from that shame, feelings of insecurity, feelings of inadequacy. I feel insecure. I am the worst parent ever. I am a terrible parent. This is going to ruin my child. I have destroyed everything. We are never going to be happy again. There we go with the spiral, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found a great deal of comfort in a lecture I listened to that was focused largely on advice to parents of children with ADHD. Um, but one of the things that he mentioned is, just like if you look at like big analyses of the literature about the influence of parents and children and how impactful um, parents are to their kids. The biggest window of influence for a parent in whether or not like their parenting is going to make or break the difference between whether or not their kid is happy is between like 0 to 2 or 3 years old. That's not a really long time. And frankly, like all the stuff that parents really worry about constantly, like what should I teach my kid about, like all these big complicated things, like it's not like you stop having influence after 3 years old. It just continues to shrink over time as you lose influential power to like peer groups and mentors and that kind of stuff, which is like normal and natural and fine. But like, so it's not like those worries are like totally irrelevant either, but like people agonize over like all kinds of stuff and just don't focus on the fact that, like, frankly, if you can do your best to present your child with like calm, loving, and caring environment where when they get upset, the best that is possible to do to help them feel better, be better, is given to them, and just have them grow up learning that like when I feel bad or threatened or whatever, someone will help me and care for me, and I'm can navigate the world with that assumption that there's people to support me. That's like the best thing that you can do. Like that has by far the highest impact of all parenting thing, and you do it in the first few years. And people, and like just hearing that, like that was kind of the more or less like clear, you know, consensus of the data when it came to that sort of thing, was like very comforting, because I realized that a lot of the stuff that I was feeding shame and stuff about were like errors that I have made that I do regret doing, but aren't as like I haven't fundamentally sabotaged my kids X, Y, or Z. It's one experience in a sea of them in a window that I don't even have the most influence anymore. These are not things that I need to be just destroying my mental state over, because that's frankly going to make me make more of those mistakes anyway.
I don't know. That also gives me more anxiety. I feel like I need to sprint down the stairs right now and read my son Karl Marx Das Kapital.
That won't work. You don't have the capacity for that. Most adults don't have the capacity for that one. Okay. But you can teach your son a very visceral example of mutual aid in the fact that, you don't expect him to return something to you for all the care that you're giving him now,
Yeah, no, I think I think you're right, and I think it's valid. And I mean, it's one of the things that I think I know we've talked about this before in other episodes, and I always feel like I'm maybe being a little shallow when I talk about it, but I think it's very valid and very true. It's and remarkably simple. The power of just being kind and loving, and how that is not something generationally has ever been a given, even among folks who were like, how am I trying to say this? Um, just because our parents weren't specifically, just because our parents weren't abusive doesn't mean they were good at providing those things. There was so many mainstream parenting concepts that have existed and still persist that run directly contrary to this, right? Like I've been told by older folks with my son, well, you need to make sure you don't hold him too much, He'll get spoiled if you hold him too much and if you coddle him too much. You need to make sure that he learns, to just kind of, to stop crying on his own.
gotta get that
And
toxic masculinity in at an early age.
and it's dad, yeah, that's an element of it, and it's also just this element of like fundamentally backwards, like, no, at these ages we have a lot of data showing that the thing that children need is to be held as much as possible, is lots of coddling, lots of love, lots of care to have all of their needs met. They are not manipulating you. They do not have the psychological, mental, or like they don't have the capacity to see color and identify shapes perfectly well. They do not have the capacity to manipulate an adult with 30 years of life experience. Like, and yeah, it seems trite to say we'll just be loving and kind. But also it's the baseline thing that yes, if you're being loving and kind, you're not going to land horribly far off the mark for being an adequate, secure parent.
Yeah. And I get frustrated with a lot of that too when it comes to like the littlest ones. Uh like you can definitely like I think some people use the manipulation rhetoric as like a justifier for things that they shouldn't need a justification for. Um like, you know, I think some people get, they get what you're saying and they um sort of internalize that and they go like, okay, I need to hold my child constantly, even when I can't handle it anymore, even when they're screaming, even when they're thing, and I like not giving themselves permission to set them down. And then they go like, they in order to justify like the ability to that it's okay to also set them down sometimes, because they haven't gotten that piece in their head, or they didn't fully process the complete version of the advice and only heard the part that says hold them all the time, will go, well, they're manipulating me. Like they're just crying because they just want this and they're not like, like they use that as a justification for doing a thing. And the problem with that is that like that justification then has its own like mutation as it were, like as you continue to use that, like you start applying it to more and more things until you like imagine your child is this like master emotional manipulator that they aren't. It's just like the kid's crying because it's experiencing something it doesn't like, and you may or may not be able to help with that, and it may or may not be reasonable to set them down at a given moment, but like that's not because they're going like, uh my mom isn't holding me as much as I want, so I know if I just make her life unpleasant enough she'll eventually have to. And like there's none, they don't have this like understanding of the social dynamics to manipulate in the first place. Like so it's just a baby crying because it's upset, and you do your best to fix that and it may or may not stop crying, and you may or may not be able to hold it for whatever amount of time. You just do what you can. You set it down when you can't, because if you keep trying to force yourself to do something then you're going to make much worse errors. and just accept that like there's no such thing as executing parenting perfectly. It's okay to set your kid down if you can't handle them crying. Set them in a room, walk away, take a breather, get a drink, not like a alcoholic drink, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like take a minute, collect yourself, and go back when you're capable of handling it, you know, like, and if you that's not in a functional state, like where you need a crazy long break or something, like that's a thing you can address with therapy or getting diagnosed or whatever. But like, um, it's not wrong to not to recognize your limits or whatever. You don't have to imagine your child as some cartoonish evil villain with a mustache and a top hat, like tying you to the railroad tracks.
Yeah, yeah, no, and if you start establishing that early, young, and you're gonna, that's just gonna get worse as they get older, and as they, like, as a teen, become actively resistant, and and it is a much more, feels like much more of an active, intentional thing. It's gonna be much easier for you to not let that brush off, and for you to internalize that of, well, they said they hate me and they never want to see me again, and um they meant that, and they're a terrible person, and da 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 da, because you've built that up from the time they were born. um the entire time somebody is a child, you need to take understanding and reference that they are not this evil manipulative force operating against you. They are a child with a child's perception of the world. um And so going from there into, and into the, more young childhood, how to address when you find yourself catastrophizing, when you find yourself spiraling into this stuff. I think one of the most important things for me, and that we've been really hitting on here, is addressing the insecurity and anxiety that is, that is existent in this. So, self-assurance, reinforcement of self-esteem, learning to believe and trust in your own abilities and your own competencies, and seeking that reinforcement out from a close network of friends and a support group. Right? Have a support team, have people who support you. And when we say support you, we don't just mean making meals and making formula bottles. It's also this kind of stuff. Hey, I need somebody to just tell me I'm doing a good fucking job, that I'm doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing, and also that I'm gonna trust them when they say that, because they would also tell me if I wasn't. um so, and uh, hand in hand with that comes, and I lead with that because we live in a society where healthcare is not universal. So it's not accessible to everyone, and it is not out there for everyone. But if it is out there for you, if it is accessible to you, um access therapy, medication, and support. Like, for a lot of this, like, I can't really give great advice on how to overcome anxiety, which is like the core of all of this catastrophization I have is anxiety. I'm really recognizing that now. I don't have good answers for how to deal with that, because honestly, answer number one comes from medication for me. Now, it doesn't for everybody, but I know for me, I'm quickly recognizing, okay, no, there's some core things going on here. I need to get medicated for then therapy and other stuff to be able to work and deal with some of this. Um, so seek that out as best you can.
And I would say like also a thing that you can do is just like be aware this is a thing that you can do. Like catastrophization is a thing. Like have that as a model in your head and be mindful of how you feel, which is hard. It takes practice. Like there are techniques and meditations and stuff like that that can help you be more mindful. But just like being more self-aware of your own state, like that kind of like metacognitive awareness can really help you interrupt some of these things. Like um uh I won't go into the rabbit hole of this, but like a subset or sub feature of some versions of ADHD is a thing called rejection sensitivity disorder, where people like the perception that someone has or even might reject you, it causes this like big painful anxiety in you, and it has to do with a lot of like environmental and like stuff that has to do with all of that. I won't get into it. Suffice it to say, this is a feature that people have, and as a thing that I struggle with. And when I didn't know about this, like I just felt these really bad emotions sometimes, especially around things where I was getting criticized, or I thought people perceived me as bad in some way, uh, and I didn't really understand them, and I just would catastrophize. But once I learned about rejection sensitivity disorder, just knowing that was the thing, I could start to feel this way and be like, wait, I think this is rejection sensitivity disorder happening to me. I'm not going to try to like rationalize it away fully here. I'm just going to like recognize that's how probably why I feel this kind of way that I kind of recognize is maybe out of proportion, and just like be like, okay, I feel this way. It's okay. It will go away. It will take some amount of time, but it will go away, and then I will be fine. And when I am fine, we can look back and revisit and determine whether or not there was a rationality there that I should be concerned about. But right now is a bad time to do that, because I will not arrive at a good conclusion. I just need to accept that I feel this way and wait for it to pass. Because all you could do.
100%. I have issues with sensory input. Uh, Likely uh, autism, but that is another thing that I need to seek um, diagnosis for. But this has been something that I've not realized until relatively recently, and the realization of that has caused me to go through, yeah, like things that in the past just caused me to spiral and catastrophize because I couldn't handle what was going on. I didn't know why, and I just spiraled until I got crushed. Now I recognize when that's happening, it's okay. I have too many sensory inputs going on at the same time, or the wrong sensory inputs happening. And I need to shut some of those down. I need to put on headphones. I need to darkroom myself. I need to do something that minimizes some of those sensory inputs. And then the pressure releases a little. Um, I didn't have that ability until I was in my late 20s. It took 28 years to be able to do that, if not more than that. Um, it, yeah, that being able to just recognize what's going on in the moment and identify it and, call it out for what it is in your own head, um, helps immensely. And it's, again, one of the things that you learn to do in therapy. Nobody ever really says what it is you do in therapy, and I would argue that that is one of the biggest things you do in therapy is learn to identify that those things happening to you, and then go through that. Okay, I understand what's happening to me. I know why this is happening. I know what's going on. That makes it better. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Well, if you have realized through this conversation that you love uh, Raise Them Left, then there's a few things that you can do. You can, if you're on YouTube, you can like the video. You can catastrophize that subscribe button. Um, and if you would like to spiral all the way down to our Patreon page at patreon.com/raise them left and contribute to us financially, that would be pretty sweet. Uh, if you're on some other platform, I don't know, interact in whatever way makes sense. I don't know all the things, but
hail us
we
on
appreciate
subspace.
we appreciate any support you throw our way. Leave a comment or something.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or whatever other time of day it is. Thank you.